All right. Hello, everyone. I hope this is working all right. I am recording on my computer for the first time, not using Zoom, and that it will be all right. And so I want to, tonight, just get through our first two labs because of all the questions I've been getting. Seems a lot of them are coming from there, and then tomorrow I'll do the plans from the last three. And so really what I just want to talk about when we're looking through all of these is just some quick identifiers, right? You see them on the table during the lab exam on Friday. You'll have a pretty good idea of what you're looking at. And some of these are going to be easier than others, and so we'll spend less time on those. And the first one we're going to look at is one of those. It's the Christmas fern. And of course, this is the only fern that we worked with this semester, and so if you see a fern, you can be pretty sure it's going to be that Christmas fern. So moving on really fast, we get to the Carolina nightshade, also called Carolina horse nettle. And when we first saw this, right, it had these orange fruits. This is actually the plant that we had in all of its wiltiness. But I'm sure as you all have been going around collecting plants for your collections, you've seen it look more like this, right, close to the ground. It has this spiky stalk, and then these very unique leaves, right? It almost looks a little bit like an evergreen tree, right? You know, like that you would draw when you were a kid. It's not going to have this flower right now, so if you see it, it's going to be that spiky stalk, spiky leaves, like so. So then moving on, we get dog fennel. And dog fennel is that really tall thing that you really can't mistake. It has these little wispy leaves coming off of it. And if you were at the review last Friday, you saw dog fennel, and it looks slightly different right now, right? It's not quite as full. It's going to be a little brown. But if you just remember these wisps, it's the only plant that we've talked about that's going to have these single little strands of leaf coming off, and it'll probably be pretty large. Even if it's just the top, it'll be, a very tall, straight plant. So then getting into goldenrod, there are a lot of species of goldenrod that are native to the southeast. And so this is one of those plants where as long as you know it's solidago, as long as you can say that's a goldenrod, you're going to be just fine. Because honestly, if you showed me a goldenrod species, I would not be able to identify it by sight either. They're all pretty close. But always good to know if you want to get more into our yellow flower friends. And so make sure you remember, these pointed leaves, they're going to be whorling up that stalk, and then brilliant yellow flowers on top. Right now in the fall, they're looking a little clumpier, a little more mangy, but the little yellow flowers, the whorled leaves, very long, thin leaves, you're looking at a goldenrod. All right, so moving on to our milk pea, and this is not to be confused with our desmodium, because they will look sort of similar, right? But with the milk pea, remember it's going to have these three little leaves on each side, and they're always going to come in bunches of three, like so. You can see in this guy, unless some are missing, but milk pea is going to be a vine, right? It's that one that you're going to find wrapped up the dog fennel, wrapped up the goldenrod, very viney. And there aren't any flowers right now. If anything, you're going to find its little pods. And so then moving on to our second legume of the night, the partridge pea, right? And it's another, like I said, legume. It's going to have those little pea pods. And how I actually like to remember this, if you remember the mimosa tree that we looked at, which is, an invasive, I always think that the partridge pea looks just like a baby little mimosa tree, right? It's like if a mimosa had a tiny little sapling, because it has those similar leaves, right? Compound leaves branching off on every side, and yes, it'll have very thin little legume pouches. Likely won't see any, with those yellow flowers right now. So then passion flower. If you were to see this on Friday, and I sure don't know where to find it, but if Zach does, then you might, who knows. These flowers are unfortunately not going to be there anymore. The biggest thing you're going to want to be looking for are these leaves. This is the passion flower leaf, and it's likely going to be in, sort of a viney little setup. Not a woody vine, but just, a green, lush vine. And I always think that these leaves look sort of like dinosaur tracks. That's how I remember, that's how I identify passion flowers in the wild, is, a dinosaur track, or maybe like a turkey track if you're more into birds. But I wouldn't try to be remembering passion flower just from this flower, because that's super easy, back in August and early September when they're still blooming. Right now, if you were to see it, yeah, it'd probably be the leaves that are going to tip you off. All right, Poor Joe. So Poor Joe is one of those grows really close to the ground plants. It's going to be very small. It makes up a lot of the just bottom layer in these disturbed fields and things like that. And so it is similar to bedstraw, and we didn't talk about bedstraw in class. And so if you see something, you're like, well, is that bedstraw or Poor Joe? It's going to be Poor Joe. Poor Joe's, and I'll be honest with you, typically one of the harder ones for me. I would just say that, yeah, if it's not going to be like a Kumarawea, if it's not going to be like a creeping Charlie, it's not going to be a clover of some sort. If it's very tiny, it looks like it got pulled up in a clump and has these little almost pine needle-like leaves. They're not going to be scaly, but that's sort of the shape they resemble, and coming up along a stalk, right, making crosses with each other, as you can see here. That's going to be your Poor Joe. So then we get to rabbit tobacco or cudweed. One of the easiest ways that you can recognize this one is this pale, pale stem. It's just going to be a pale green, blue, almost white, and then these white buds on top. They're going to come with every one of the cudweeds that we've been looking at, and this is the Naphthallium obtusifolium. There are other cudweeds. This is the one that we talk about. And remember, it also has a very distinct smell, right? Almost smells sweet. And I haven't seen a lot of these out when I've just been planting, but there is a good chance that we might still find one or two. So be looking for these white buds, and then this very pale stem, and then leaves that sort of look like goldenrods, very long, very thin, but they're going to be curling up. I guess you can't see what I'm doing with my hands right now, but yeah, curling up toward the top of the plant. So then sensitive briar, this is a super, super rare plant, and so what you'll want to make sure you understand about sensitive briar is it has that same leaf structure as our partridge pea up here, right? It's going to have those compound leaves, sort of looks like a mimosa. Sensitive briars, though, are going to have these weird little baubles on them, right? As you can see, this is the one from class. I have not seen any of them with the flowers still on, but the other thing that you can tell that's different between the sensitive briar and the partridge pea, if you are, confused by the leaves, is that this is a briar for a reason, right? The stem is very pokey, whereas the partridge pea is going to be almost a woody stem, right? I mean, it doesn't have any briars coming off of it. So that's really how I think about it. Sensitive plant, and if I found one of these, I'd be excited because I haven't seen one in a month or two, but it'll also, the leaves are sensitive, right? They'll curl up when you touch them if it's fresh. All right, so Sericea lespedeza. I've been doing this for a semester. I still can't say this one. But this is going to be your big Lespedeza, and we didn't get to trailing Lespedeza or any of the other big Lespedezas. So if you see a big stalk with these little nub leaves, right, that's going to be your Sericea lespedeza. Yeah, I don't have too much more to say about this. This is another one of those invasives that you'll see everywhere. And yeah, if you have any more questions about that on how to identify it, I think it's one of those ones that we've gone over a lot. All right, so thistle. So there are so many types of thistle, so many. Some are native, some are invasive. The thing you need to know about thistles is they have mean-looking leaves, super spiky, but be very careful. Do not confuse these with a burnweed, fireweed, right? Because they have leaves that can sort of look like a thistle, and we'll get to that, I think, in the Lab 2 list, I think. But make sure you know the difference between a fireweed and a thistle, right? Thistles will have a spike on the ends of most leaves, super spiky, they just look like mean plants. Fireweed will be less so. Thistles are also going to have flowers. Fireweeds will typically just have sort of like a cottony puff. Sort of like what looks here, but even more just white cottony stuff. Like it never looks like it doesn't look like it was a flower at one point, like it does here. So that's thistle. That's another one that you'll likely just need to know down to genus, the Cirsium. All right, wingstem. So this is one that I'm pretty sure you've seen in almost every review. Wingstem, very green plant, has these big ovular leaves with the point at the end, and of course the most telling thing about wingstem is the wings, right? Most of the flowers are just going to have these two little petals in the wing. Sometimes they'll have more petals, but if you see a yellow flower with these larger petals, right, not a goldenrod petal, but these larger petals, especially if they're in this wing shape, you can bet that that will be wingstem. All right, so Japanese stilt grass. This is going to be another one that's going to come in a clump, probably. This stuff is terrible invasive. Will just take over an understory. And it's very thin, leaves toward the top, and don't confuse this with Poor Joe. They do look different. This one's going to have much bigger leaves than the Poor Joe, and it'll likely have fewer leaves than Poor Joe. They'll typically be at the top. And let's look at Poor Joe again, just to so Poor Joe, right, very small leaves, and they're going to be thicker, right? There's going to be a little more substance to those leaves. You couldn't like run your nail through them quite as easy. Japanese stilt grass is much more fragile. And so just familiarize yourself with what those two look like. They're both ground cover. Both come in disturbed areas. All right, purple top. So when we learned this one, it was very easy because it had the purple top, right? Like so. As it gets older, and I am still seeing some around with purple tops, but as we get later into the season, they start to lose that purple and start to look a little more like a normal grass. And so what I would really recommend for this one is make sure you are comfortable with how the heads are going to look, right? Because this is never going to look like a Pasphalum, but just make sure that among the other grasses, like your panic grass, things like that, you can identify what the seed head looks like, even if it's starting to lose that purple. Okay, so now we get to spike uniola. It's also called slender wood oats, and don't confuse this with normal wood oats or sea oats or Indian oats that have like that big seed head that looks like, I don't know, like an actual grain you would eat, right? These are those slender wood oats, and they just got these little spikes all the way up. They're typically going to be this color this time in the season, and yeah, you're just looking for a very tall, thin stalk with just little guys poking off every once in a while. Alright, so moving into our 1 or 2 shrubs from Lab 1. This is the autumn olive. It's going to be characterized by a leaf that's green on top, silver on the bottom. And I think we also went over thorny olive. The thorny olive isn't going to have this like pale gray-green silver. It's going to be more tan. And so that's how you can often tell the difference between those two. The leaves are also slightly different shaped, and we will get into that when I get to thorny olive. This time of year as well, it also has these edible berries. They're going to be red, and they'll have these like little speckle marks on it. Ideally, if I were to bring this species in, and yeah, I had found it I would try to get some with berries, but obviously that can never be promised. So I'd get really familiar with these leaves and the colors on either side and that leaf shape. Alright, so now we have the beautyberry. This one is pretty easy because nothing else has vibrant purple berries. Big leaf, you're going to have these clusters of purple berries, or I think they're starting to get sort of gray now on some of the ones I see. Really nice plant. I couldn't believe it was native when I first saw it. I thought it had to be an invasive from somewhere, but no, it is native to Georgia. Alright, Chinese privet. So this is going to be our more telling one here. It's going to have these leaves on either side, all along one stem, not stem, branch. And the leaves are sort of leathery, right? They're not going to be soft, very smooth, rounded leaves. They won't have a point. And so when you see, leaves on each side parallel with each other, and you'll have to excuse my my lack of scientific terms. I never took dendrology, and so I can't perfectly scientifically describe, what is that word, alternating? I don't know, but they'll look like this. And some of them will have berries this time of year. I've not seen any out and about. And so if you get long stem with just leathery leaves on either side, round leaves, it'll likely be your Chinese privet. I know a lot of you have been getting those just fine in reviews. And this is a really bad invasive. And typically if it has like Chinese or Japanese in front of it, I mean, that's sort of a shoo-in for, yes, this is likely invasive. Elliott's blueberry. Let's see, this is going to be another little shrub, and the leaves here are also going to be leathery, but they'll have, one, they're not going to be, it's not a symmetrical branch, right? So you see, like, I guess down here where my cursor is, it's going to be leaves alternating each side. They won't be right next to each other on the branch. You can separate from privet like that. They will also more likely have green stems, though this late in the season they might be starting to turn brown. But yeah, leathery pointed leaves, and they'll be alternating. Alright, our brambles, our blackberry, our rubus genus. So these guys are going to be spiky. They're going to typically have these groups of 3 leaves. And then they're going to have the spikes running up the whole side. Someone at the review the other day brought in a rubus species that looked like, to be quite honest, like a maple leaf viburnum. We're not going to have any of those. It's going to be, some sort of traditional rubus if that shows up. Alright, Japanese honeysuckle, that's going to be your long vine. Right now they're starting to get some red berries. And I believe this is the only honeysuckle we talked about. So these are going to have softer leaves than the privet, but the leaf structure where they're going to be on either side is going to stay the same. So they will likely have red berries. They'll be like a very lopey branch, right? Because this thing sort of is a vine. And I know that's another one that, invasive by the way, but another one that a lot of you have been getting pretty regularly in our reviews. Alright, muscadine grape. So this one's tough, and remember this is a wild grape technically, right? It's in the Vitis genus. But muscadine grape is going to be the one with the really, really big grapes and the heart-shaped leaves, right? And so all wild grapes have sort of heart-shaped leaves, but these ones are very full. They make almost more of a circle than your typical wild grape, which will be more pointed one way or the other. These are just very circular, looks just like a heart. Oh, and then I know somebody asked me about lobes the other day, and I'm not actually sure if this is, well, I guess I can just count the lobes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Yeah, so I think this may be the one with 13 lobes, but let me check with wild grape before I actually confirm that. Alright, Virginia creeper. I always remember this because the species name is, I tried to say it wasn't coming out, but basically Quinn meaning like quintuple, right? 5. It's going to have 5 leaves. It's going to come in a long vine. Typically, 2 of the leaves will be smaller than the other in like these medium-sized plants, but I wouldn't memorize that. But yeah, basically just 5 leaves all coming out at equal angles and on a vine. That's going to be your Virginia creeper. Alright, so that is the entirety of Lab 1, and I'm going to pause for just a second to make sure the recording worked, and then I will go on through Lab 2. If at any time you have any questions about any of these, if you think that you'd like some more explanation, if you think that I missed something, please let me know. My email is in the group chat. Alright, I will see you soon for Lab 2.